WNBA finals. And so I'll leave it there. I mean, I'm just obviously disheartened. I'm a human too. I have a family. I have two kids who are devastated by these comments. And so all I'll say is just, it's obviously.
They called it a historic offer, the kind of deal that was supposed to silence critics, stabilize the league, and lock in the future of women's basketball. $1 million salary for top players, bigger bonuses, a promise that the WNBA was finally ready to step into a new era. But instead of celebration, the league got something no one was prepared for. Caitlin Clark and the entire players' union pushed the deal back across the table and walked away from it completely. The moment that rejection hit the league office, everything unraveled. Owners panicked, negotiators froze, and suddenly whispers began leaking from inside the headquarters. Whispers that Commissioner Kathy Engelbert wasn't just in trouble, she was being pushed out. What was supposed to be the league's greatest flex had instantly turned into the clearest sign of internal collapse. But here's the real mystery. How does one decision, one refusal, have enough force to topple the most powerful figure in the WNBA? How does a single contract dispute turn into a political earthquake deep enough to shake the commissioner out of her chair? To understand that, you have to look beyond the headlines, because this wasn't just a rejection, it was a revolt. On paper, the offer looked like a dream. A brand new CBA with salaries that finally cracked 7 figures. A package where the league promised over $1 million a year for its top-tier, stars-based pay bonuses, marketing deals, and performance incentives stacked into one shiny headline. For years, fans begged the WNBA to raise salaries, and the moment this package leaked online, it felt like the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. Comment sections lit up with celebration. Media outlets called it a historic leap. And to the casual eye, it was exactly that. But that's the part the league was counting on the casual eye. The players, the women actually living inside the system, saw something entirely different. The $1 million label was real, yes, but the fine print revealed the trap. The salary cap was fixed. The bonuses were conditional. And the structure locked players into long-term limits that stopped them from earning anywhere near what the league itself was projected to bring in. It was a gift that came with handcuffs. Most importantly, there was zero revenue sharing. No percentage of ticket sales, no portion of jersey profits, no cut of the billions about to flow in from media contracts. The offer wasn't built to elevate the players, it was built to freeze them, to lock the rising stars into numbers that would look generous today but insulting tomorrow. And for the first time, the players didn't flinch. They didn't hesitate. They recognized exactly what the deal represented: the league trying to protect its own upside while disguising it as progress. Walking away from that offer wasn't just a negotiation tactic, it was the first undeniable sign that this generation of athletes was done settling, done waiting, and done playing by rules designed decades ago. To understand why the players rejected the $1 million offer so quickly, you have to follow the money, not the money they were offered, but the money the league is about to make. Behind closed doors, the WNBA is preparing to sign a media rights deal worth more than $2 billion over the next decade. That kind of contract doesn't just change budgets, it changes the entire ecosystem of a league. TV networks don't throw around billion-dollar checks unless they expect massive returns, and the WNBA knows exactly how valuable its product has become. But here's where the tension explodes. While league revenues are soaring into the billions, player salaries are still stuck in the hundreds of thousands. Even the historic $1 million deal only represents a small fraction of the money pouring in. When you compare revenue projections to player compensation, the gap is glaring. The owners get the upside, the players get the leftovers. And that's where the new era comes in. Today's stars aren't operating in the old mindset anymore. They understand their market value down to the decimal. They see the sold-out arenas, the skyrocketing ticket prices, the merchandise that sells out in minutes. They know who's driving the profits, and it's not the suits in the boardrooms. Caitlin Clark's arrival made the imbalance impossible to ignore. One rookie generated more revenue, viewership, and cultural energy than the league had seen in 2 decades. Teams that never sold out games were suddenly charging NBA-level prices. TV ratings doubled. Merch exploded. Every organization in the league benefited financially from her presence, yet her compensation remained capped under outdated rules. That's when the players did the math. The owners weren't offering opportunity, they were offering crumbs. And Caitlin Clark's impact exposed just how wide the gap had grown between what the league earns and what the players actually get. Kathy Engelbert entered the WNBA with a resume built for Wall Street, not locker rooms. She came from decades of corporate leadership, a world built on spreadsheets, presentations, and controlled messaging. For a while, that was exactly what the league needed: someone who could steady the finances and convince sponsors the WNBA was worth betting on. But as the players evolved into global brands with real power, Engelbert's old-school approach started clashing with a new generation of athletes who refused to be treated like footnotes in their own league. The first cracks appeared with the travel controversies. While the league's valuation climbed, players were still commuting like interns, cramped commercial flights, unpredictable delays, and inconsistent access to charters. Then came the prioritization rule, a decision that effectively punished players for earning more overseas than they did at home. Instead of protecting players, the policy boxed them in, forcing many to choose between financial stability and league loyalty. It felt like the league was safeguarding its image, not its athletes. But the real turning point, the moment trust evaporated, happened in that now infamous CNBC interview. When Engelbert was asked about the racism, harassment, and toxic fan behavior targeting players, she didn't defend them. She didn't condemn the hate. She delivered a polished, robotic answer about fan engagement and rivalries, comparing the situation to Magic and Bird. To the players, it felt like she reduced their lived experiences to a marketing opportunity. That interview wasn't just tone-deaf, it was a betrayal. Internally, the sentiment shifted overnight. Players described her leadership as cold, distant, and corporate. She felt more like a CEO protecting the brand than a commissioner protecting her athletes. And once trust breaks at that level, it doesn't recover. The players didn't just lose faith in Engelbert, they stopped seeing her as someone who understood them at all. When the CBA offer hit the table, the league expected hesitation, negotiation, maybe a few demands scribbled into the margins. What they didn't expect was unity. And certainly not unity from the biggest names in the sport: Caitlin Clark, Breanna Stewart, Aja Wilson, Angel Reese. These women rarely play on the same teams, but the moment the details of the deal became clear, they aligned with one voice. The union didn't just disagree with the offer, they rejected it outright together without blinking. That kind of solidarity doesn't form overnight. For years, the WNBA marketed the slogan, "Bet on women," pushing the idea that attention, support, and visibility were the keys to growth. But now the players had the spotlight, the fan base, and the leverage. The message flipped almost instantly. Bet on women became pay women. The league benefited from the cultural wave, but the stars behind that wave were done settling for emotional slogans while the executives cashed in. The union finally understood the truth. For the first time in league history, they had leverage the league could not afford to ignore. Sold-out arenas, record-shattering viewership, viral moments every week, the players realized they weren't just employees. They were the product. Without them, the league had nothing to sell. And that's where Engelbert became the symbol of everything holding the league back. To the players, she wasn't a bridge to the future. She was the barrier standing between them and the modern sports economy. So when the union publicly walked away from the historic CBA, it became more than a negotiation tactic. It became a statement, a symbolic revolt, a declaration that the old system was dead and the players were ready to tear down whatever was left standing in their way. The rejection wasn't just a no, it was a warning shot. Just when the WNBA thought it had complete control over the landscape, a new storm rolled in from a direction no one anticipated from its own stars. Breanna Stewart and Napheesa Collier quietly built something that would change the power dynamics of the entire sport, unrivaled, a 3-on-3 league designed entirely around player ownership, player profit, and player freedom. No salary caps, no restrictive contracts, and most importantly, equity, something the WNBA had never even come close to offering. Unrivaled wasn't just an alternative league, it was a countermodel. A short season system with 6-figure payouts for just a few weeks of play. A setup where stars could earn more money in a month than they made in an entire WNBA season. And with revenue sharing baked in, players weren't just collecting checks, they were owning the product. Suddenly, the WNBA's monopoly, the one it relied on to control the labor market, wasn't a monopoly anymore. For the first time, players had real options, real leverage, real independence. They didn't have to threaten to go overseas for money. They could stay in the US and still earn more. This terrified owners. If Stewart, Collier, and Clark decided Unrivaled was the future, the WNBA could crumble overnight. Empty arenas, lost TV deals, a talent drain the league couldn't recover from. And as this new league gained momentum, fingers began pointing toward one person, Kathy Engelbert. Owners believed she underestimated the threat. She assumed Unrivaled was a side project, a hobby. She didn't see it as the nuclear button players now had access to. In their eyes, she failed to counter it, failed to compete with it, and failed to protect the league's long-term stability. Unrivaled didn't just challenge the WNBA, it exposed how unprepared Engelbert was for the modern era of athlete empowerment. And that failure would become one more reason the owners were ready to push her out the door. Behind the scenes, the owners weren't just worried, they were in full-blown crisis mode. The moment the players rejected the CBA, every executive in the league office understood what that meant. The 2026 season was officially in danger. A lockout wasn't some distant possibility. It was staring them in the face. And a lost season wouldn't just hurt the basketball product, it would be a financial catastrophe. The WNBA had already committed to billion-dollar TV contracts. Networks expected live games, star power, and consistent ratings. If the players sat out, the league wouldn't just face angry sponsors, it would face breach of contract penalties that could drain millions in a matter of months. Arena partners had obligations to scheduled events, staffing local deals, and regional sponsorships. A canceled season would ripple through every department of the business, and the owners knew they were the ones who'd eat the losses. Worse, the league's soaring valuation wasn't guaranteed to survive without its biggest stars. Investors weren't betting on the WNBA brand alone, they were betting on Clark Stewart, Wilson Reese, and the cultural movement they created. No stars on the floor meant no ratings. No ratings meant no money. And suddenly, the billion-dollar dream started looking like a bubble that could pop overnight. Something had to give. Someone had to take the fall. The owners looked at the chessboard and made the only move they believed could save them: sacrifice Engelbert. Not because she was the root of every problem, but because getting rid of her was the fastest way to reset negotiations and convince the union that the league was ready to change course. Her resignation had to look peaceful: a mutual agreement, a respectful farewell, a thank you for your service press release. But internally, everyone knew what it really was: a strategic removal, a desperate attempt to calm the revolt before the entire 2026 season went up in flames. In every generation of sports, there's a moment when one athlete becomes more than a player, they become the economy. For the WNBA, that shift happened the moment Caitlin Clark stepped onto a professional court. As a rookie, she didn't just boost ticket sales or merch numbers. She transformed the league's financial identity. Teams that once struggled to fill arenas suddenly had standing room-only crowds. Road games turned into traveling sellouts. TV ratings spiked to levels the league had never touched before. Clark wasn't just a star, she was an economic engine. And that's exactly why her silence during the CBA revolt carried more weight than a public statement ever could. Clark didn't need to tweet. She didn't need to rant. She didn't need to call for Engelbert's resignation. All she had to do was stand with the union and refuse the deal. The owners understood the message instantly. If the league tried to push back, they'd be fighting the single most valuable asset in women's basketball. It's one thing for a union to threaten a lockout. It's another when the athlete driving the league's revenue refuses to be bought by a $1 million headline. Her stance didn't just support the union, it legitimized the revolt. It told players, fans, and executives that the old hierarchy was dead. You couldn't lean on outdated leadership while expecting modern superstars to stay silent. Behind closed doors, owners admitted something they'd never say publicly. Clark's alignment with the players was the tipping point that made Engelbert's position untenable. If she supported the commissioner, Engelbert might have survived. Her refusal settled the debate. Caitlin Clark proved a new reality in today's WNBA. The commissioner isn't the one with power. The players are, and she's the one leading the shift. With Engelbert pushed out and negotiations frozen, the WNBA now finds itself in the most unstable moment in its history. The league is scrambling behind the scenes, rushing to identify a new commissioner who can walk into a battlefield and somehow bring order to a fight that's already spiraled out of control. This isn't a ceremonial position anymore. Whoever steps into that role will be walking straight into a war. One of the biggest questions now is who the players will accept. Many within the union are privately advocating for an ex-player, someone who understands the culture, the travel demands, the financial realities, and the unspoken pressures that define their careers. Bringing in another corporate executive risks sending a message the players have already rejected, that the league values business first and athletes second. Choosing someone with playing experience would be a powerful olive branch. But that alone won't solve the core issue. The owners must prove, not promise, that they're ready to embrace revenue sharing. If they continue hiding behind caps, restrictions, and outdated models, negotiations will stall all over again. The union knows the money exists. The fans know the money exists. And after the most successful year in league history, excuses simply won't survive another round. The threat of a lockout still looms like a shadow over the 2026 season. Without trust, no deal holds. Without structural change, new salary systems, consistent charter travel, modern marketing strategies, and transparent governance, the next CBA will collapse just like the last one. The WNBA is standing at a crossroads, and there's no middle path left. Either it modernizes, embracing the new era of athlete empowerment and shared prosperity, or it risks collapsing under the weight of the very revolution it helped create. Absolutely, here is the conclusion written in the same tone, length, and pacing as your sections. The WNBA has reached a moment it can't walk away from. For years, the league clung to an old identity, one built on survival compromise and patience. But that version of the WNBA doesn't exist anymore. The players who once quietly accepted the system are now partners in every sense of the word. They drive the ratings, the revenue, the cultural wave, and the future. And they're no longer willing to sit in the passenger seat while executives decide their value. Engelbert's exit makes that shift undeniable. Her departure isn't just the removal of a commissioner, it's the end of an era where corporate first leadership dictated the direction of the league. The collapse of the CBA wasn't a setback. It was the spark that exposed just how much power the players truly have. They didn't just reject a deal, they rewrote the balance of the entire sport. Now the league stands at its most important crossroads: modernize or crumble. Share power or risk losing everything. The next decisions will define not just a season, but an entire generation of women's basketball. So the final question becomes unavoidable. Will the WNBA embrace this new era, or fall apart trying to protect the past?